At night, when silence folds over the edges of the world and even thought begins to dim, the physicist sits before a dying candle and wonders, what truly happens to the mind when the body ceases to be? He does not think of ghosts or heavens or endless voids, but of energy, pure, unfiltered, mathematical energy. Science tells him that energy cannot be destroyed, only transformed. Yet consciousness is not just energy. It is awareness, a flicker within the dark, an experience of being. When the body dies, neurons fall silent, electrical impulses fade, the brain's networks collapse into stillness. But what happens to that experience, that internal sense of I? Does it vanish like smoke from a dying star? Or does it ripple through the universe encoded in ways science has yet to name? He stares at the candlelight, watching how the flame dances until it splits into waves and particles, behaving as both, obeying rules that make no sense in the language of logic. Death, he thinks, might be like that, an event we think we understand until we touch it. Then it dissolves into paradox. In the final seconds of life, the brain doesn't go quietly. Studies of near-death experiences show bursts of electrical activity, a storm of synchronized firing sweeping through the cortex as if the mind flares one last time before darkness. Scientists call it terminal spreading depolarization. But to the physicist, it feels like a final symphony, the brain releasing every note it ever learned in a single, blazing crescendo. Consciousness, he muses, may not end abruptly but fade through layers, like light sinking beneath an ocean, each layer dimmer but still there for a moment longer. What we call death could simply be the slowing of perception until it crosses the event horizon of awareness, a point beyond which the self can no longer observe itself. Perhaps, he thinks, this boundary is not destruction but transition, just as a star's collapse becomes a black hole, not an ending, but a transformation of form. The brain is a universe of its own, 86 billion neurons linked by trillions of synapses, each firing like a tiny sun. Within this neural cosmos, memories orbit like planets, emotions flow like gravity, and thought emerges as patterns of electromagnetic resonance. When death comes, those connections begin to unravel. Yet the physicist suspects that consciousness, being emergent, might not depend solely on the physical. Quantum physicists once proposed that the mind could be tied to microtubules within neurons, structures small enough to interact with quantum fields. It's a controversial idea, but it haunts him. Because if consciousness has even a quantum fingerprint, then death isn't annihilation, it's entanglement. The patterns that define you could disperse into the quantum fabric of reality, scattered but not lost, like ripples in space-time that never fully fade. He imagines it. The last breath escapes. The heart slows, and the electrical storm that was the self dissolves outward. For a brief instant, all those patterns, every thought, memory, dream, might echo as electromagnetic waves. Some fade into heat, some into light. Some, perhaps, remain entangled in the universe's background radiation, a ghostly imprint woven into the cosmic web. The physicist smiles faintly at the thought. Science may never find the soul, but it can't deny that information persists. The laws of thermodynamics guard it fiercely. Nothing disappears, everything transforms. So maybe death is less about loss and more about translation. Consciousness, once bound to the fragile machinery of the brain, becomes diffuse, an unlocalized pattern in a field so vast we can't perceive it. He turns to his notebook and writes, "When we die, the brain stops perceiving, but the universe keeps thinking." It's not a scientific statement, not yet, but it feels true. The same atoms that make up thought, the carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, once belonged to stars that lived and died billions of years ago. Their light still travels across space, still visible to telescopes that haven't even been built. If the universe can preserve the memory of a star, why not the echo of a mind? Consciousness might not survive in the way the ego imagines, but perhaps its essence, its informational signature, becomes part of the same system that births galaxies. Maybe death is the moment when the boundary between self and universe dissolves, and the two become indistinguishable. He recalls an experiment where scientists recorded the brainwaves of dying patients. Just before death, the patterns resembled those seen in deep meditation and dreaming. It was as if the mind, facing its end, turned inward, entering its own infinite. The physicist wonders if death is simply the brain entering its final dream, a dream so vast it never ends. The neurons fire, then fade, but their signal keeps echoing, perhaps beyond the limits of perception. What if the afterlife isn't a place, but a state? The state of information no longer localized in flesh but distributed through the field of existence. Outside, the night sky stretches endlessly. Each star is a point of data, each photon a messenger from another time. He feels a strange kinship with that light. The human mind, like the cosmos, is a temporary arrangement of energy and pattern, existing between two eternities of silence. But silence, he realizes, is not absence. It's potential. Just as sound emerges from vibration, life emerges from the dance between chaos and order. Death may simply be the pause between movements, the universe taking a breath before creating again. He writes another note. The self is not destroyed by death. It is unmeasured. Because to measure is to observe, and to observe requires separation. Once the observer dissolves, so does the illusion of individuality. The physicist imagines that, after death, consciousness doesn't vanish but returns to a universal baseline, the pure awareness from which everything arises. The mystics called it oneness. The scientists call it the quantum field. Both, perhaps, are describing the same thing from opposite ends of language. The candle burns lower. Shadows stretch across his desk like dark rivers. He closes his eyes, and for a moment he tries to feel what it might be like to let go, to have the mind detach from its body, to stop sensing, thinking, resisting. He imagines floating not through space, but through the absence of it, through the stillness that exists between particles. There, identity melts. There, time loses meaning. There, perhaps, the last flicker of consciousness realizes it was never separate from the universe at all. The physicist breathes deeply, the faint scent of candle wax and paper grounding him in the moment as his thoughts drift farther from it. He wonders if death feels anything like this, an awareness slowly unspooling from the body, still tethered for a heartbeat longer before dissolving into everything. The body is matter, the brain, a machine of miraculous complexity. But what we call mind might be something else entirely. Neuroscientists describe it as the emergent property of brain activity, like the music that arises when the instrument is played. When the instrument breaks, the music stops. Yet the physicist knows that music itself doesn't cease to exist. It simply transfers, waiting to be played again, under new hands, in a new form. Could consciousness, then, be a similar phenomenon? A pattern of resonance that exists wherever the right conditions appear? When the body dies, perhaps the melody fades, but the potential for music, the structure of harmony itself, remains encoded in the universe. He recalls a theory from information physics that the universe is fundamentally made of data, not matter. Every atom, every photon, every interaction encodes bits of information, woven into the fabric of space-time. The brain, then, is not an origin of consciousness but a translator of it, a biological interface tuned to a specific frequency of reality. Death, in this view, is not the destruction of information, but the release of the signal from its receiver. The transmitter, the body, stops working, but the signal continues, diffused, absorbed, transformed. The physicist finds that idea comforting in a quiet, scientific way. Consciousness, stripped of form, might return to the informational substrate from which it emerged, the same field that gives rise to stars, cells, and thought itself. He looks at his own reflection in the dark window, faint and fading in the candlelight, and thinks of entropy, the universe's slow drift toward disorder. Everything, eventually, breaks down. Systems lose coherence. But in that decay lies creation. Stars die to form heavier elements. Galaxies collide to form new ones. When the brain decays, its energy returns to the cosmos, its atoms recycled into new lives, new possibilities. The question isn't whether we live on, but in what form we do. Perhaps the mind, in dying, undergoes its own version of cosmic recycling, its patterns of thought and emotion scattering into the collective field of consciousness that underlies all existence. There's a strange kind of humility in this view. It removes the fear of personal extinction and replaces it with awe. Because if your awareness dissolves into the larger field, then you were never truly separate to begin with. Every thought you've ever had, every feeling, every spark of love or fear, has already been interacting with the universe in subtle, immeasurable ways, through electromagnetic fields, through quantum vibrations, through the gravitational influence of every particle that composes you. The self, then, is not a container but a connection, a temporary shape in the ocean of being. Death is simply the wave returning to the sea. He thinks of ancient philosophers who spoke of the soul as breath, something invisible, transient, yet vital. Modern science has different words, but perhaps the intuition was right. Consciousness could be the breath of the universe itself, inhaling through matter, exhaling through dissolution. The physicist wonders if the universe dreams through us, using our minds as instruments of experience. If so, then death isn't an end but a return, the point where the dreamer wakes, only to realize the dream was part of something greater all along. He flips to a fresh page and writes, "If the brain is an instrument, then death is the moment the music returns to silence. But silence, too, contains sound not yet played." He closes his eyes and listens, as though the stillness around him holds an unspoken rhythm. He imagines the instant after death not as darkness but as expansion, a release of boundaries, a merging with the total field of existence. Without sensory input, without language or thought, perhaps consciousness perceives itself directly for the first time, not as I am, but as everything is. He remembers a paper he once read describing how, just before death, the brain floods with DMT, the same chemical responsible for deep mystical experiences. In that final surge, time stretches, perception expands, and individuals often report seeing light, hearing music, feeling infinite peace. The physicist doesn't dismiss it as fantasy. He thinks of it as the brain's final act of grace, a neurochemical bridge easing the mind from one state to another. It's as if nature designed a soft landing for the consciousness it created, guiding it gently into dissolution. Outside, the night deepens. The moon is half hidden by clouds, casting fractured beams across his desk. He watches them flicker, thinking how even light must travel through darkness to be seen. The mind, too, might need to pass through the shadow of death to glimpse a broader reality. Perhaps what we call afterlife isn't a realm, but a realization, a stage of awareness freed from the illusion of time. Without time, there's no before or after, no birth or death, only continuous presence. That, he suspects, might be what consciousness truly is, the timeless dimension underlying every fleeting moment of life. He writes again, "Death may not erase consciousness, only its timeline. Because if awareness is fundamental, a property of the universe rather than the brain, then death changes only the way it's expressed. Like energy-changing phase, it moves from one form to another, unseen but not gone." The physicist's thoughts drift to the idea of black holes, regions where matter collapses, yet information, according to physics, cannot be lost. Hawking radiation suggests that even the deepest gravity wells leak data back into space, encoded in the faintest of whispers. Perhaps the human mind, too, leaves behind such whispers, subtle patterns in quantum fields, the faint echo of awareness bleeding through reality long after the body is gone. He finds himself smiling, not out of certainty, but wonder. Maybe death, like the horizon, is only a limit of perception. Beyond it, the traveler continues, unseen. The physicist tilts his head back, closing his eyes. He imagines the moment when neurons go quiet and the world begins to fade. The colors dim, the edges blur. But then something unexpected happens. Awareness doesn't stop. It expands. It stops being local, stops being contained within a skull. Instead, it diffuses, like ink in water, merging with everything it once tried to observe. Perhaps that's what eternity feels like, not endless time, but the absence of it. Not existence prolonged, but separation undone. The candle flickers one last time, its light reflected in the glass of his spectacles, before dimming into smoke. He watches the curl of it rise and vanish. To him, that's not a metaphor of ending, but of continuity. Matter becoming air, form becoming formlessness, visible becoming invisible. The mind, too, may rise in this way, unseen but present, carried into the unseen architecture of the cosmos,